Is that what you ordered? Chloe sneered, placing the $390 Wagyu plate down with deliberate force, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The restaurant fell eerily silent as all eyes turned toward the man in the hoodie seated by the kitchen. But when Jamal Preston looked up, smiled calmly, and said, "It looks perfect, thank you," no one could have guessed that within moments, the entire room would learn exactly who he was. Verrill was the kind of restaurant that seemed to float above the ordinary world. Nestled between high-rise towers in Manhattan's Upper East Side, its entrance shimmered beneath gold-accented awnings and soft lighting. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast reflections on polished marble floors, and diners in tailored suits and evening gowns sat at tables draped in ivory linens, sipping imported wines and murmuring over foie gras and truffle risotto. To the people seated inside, Verrill wasn't just a restaurant, it was a statement of status. And into this world of curated elegance walked Jamal Preston. He didn't look like he belonged, at least not to the untrained eye. Wearing a dark gray hoodie, jeans, and scuffed vintage Jordans, Jamal looked more like someone who had taken a wrong turn into luxury than a guest. His salt and pepper beard was neatly trimmed, and his gait was unhurried, even graceful, but understated. The maitre d' glanced up from the podium, his smile faltering for a second before quickly returning. "Good evening, sir," he said, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Jamal nodded politely. "Evening. Just me tonight." The maitre d' gave a courteous nod, then turned toward a young waitress standing nearby. "Chloe, would you show our guest to a table?" Chloe Harrington was 26, sharp-featured and sharp-tongued, though she kept the latter hidden beneath a polished smile. She had worked at Verrill for just under 2 years and had quickly developed an eye for who belonged and who didn't. And in her estimation, Jamal most certainly didn't. She scanned his hoodie, the worn sneakers, the absence of designer labels, or the quiet elegance that usually accompanied guests who walked in solo. Her mind made a snap decision, probably another tourist looking to sit in, take a selfie, and maybe order a water. "Of course," she said, her tone professional but tight. As she picked up a menu and led the way, Chloe deliberately avoided the prime seating near the center of the restaurant, the places under the chandelier, where the pianist's gentle melodies wafted like perfume and the staff smiled a little wider. Instead, she took a sharp turn toward the far rear, just outside the kitchen hallway, where the lights dimmed a shade too low and the aroma of seared duck sometimes gave way to whiffs of industrial dish soap. "Right this way," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jamal said nothing. He followed calmly, not even glancing at the guests who lifted their eyebrows or exchanged subtle glances behind wine glasses. Chloe pulled out the chair and placed the menu on the table with a soft but intentional thud. "This one should suit you," she said lightly, her tone laced with just enough edge to be felt. Jamal took his seat without a word. He opened the menu slowly, as though it were a book he had read many times before. Chloe lingered for a second, waiting, perhaps, for him to look up confused or to stumble over the French dish names. But he didn't. "May I bring you some water to start?" she asked, crossing her arms slightly. Jamal looked up, finally meeting her gaze. His voice was warm, smooth, and relaxed. "Still water. And I'll have the caviar-seared Wagyu strip loin." Chloe blinked. "That's our most expensive item," she said before she could stop herself. It came out more like a challenge than a clarification. Jamal only smiled. "I know." The response was so calm, so confidently delivered, it left her without a follow-up. "Very well," she muttered, jotting it down and turning on her heel. As she walked back toward the center of the restaurant, her mind churned. Who was this guy? He hadn't flinched, hadn't hesitated, and certainly didn't act like someone trying to sneak into a place above his budget. Chloe stopped at the counter where another server, Jason, was folding napkins. "The guy in the back," she said under her breath. "Just ordered the Wagyu strip." In a hoodie. Jason looked up. Maybe he's one of those quiet money types. You know, rich people who dress like they're broke. Chloe rolled her eyes. Or maybe he's just trying to impress someone who's not showing up. Back at the table, Jamal watched the room as if it were a play. The gentle hum of conversation, the clink of glasses, the soft rise and fall of piano chords, all of it washed over him like a familiar tide. He wasn't new to places like Verrell. In fact, he had invested in a dozen upscale restaurants just like it. He could recognize every detail of the layout, the subtle cues of service hierarchy, and the invisible code of conduct that determined who was welcomed and who was merely tolerated. The truth was, Jamal Preston could buy Verrell 3 times over. He had co-founded a tech company in the early 2000s that revolutionized wireless security infrastructure. After selling it for hundreds of millions, he had spent the last decade building community centers and youth tech hubs in underserved neighborhoods. He didn't care for flashy cars or tailored suits. What he valued now was purpose and comfort. And tonight, comfort meant a hoodie, a hot plate of Wagyu, and maybe some dessert. Still, he noticed Chloe's sneers. He saw the glances. He heard the whispered speculations. But he also knew that staying silent, sitting still, and responding with composure was often the loudest statement one could make. A couple seated 3 tables away exchanged amused glances. The woman leaned toward her partner. "Did you see what he ordered? That's a $400 steak. And those shoes, are those Jordans?" The man chuckled. "Maybe he's a food critic undercover," he joked. At another table, an older white couple, the Whitakers, watched the situation unfold. Mr. Whitaker sipped his wine thoughtfully. "He's handling it with more grace than most would," he murmured. His wife nodded. "Some people walk in and shake the room without saying a word. He's one of them." Jamal, for his part, sat with his back straight, fingers lightly folded on the table. The cello player in the corner had begun a rendition of Autumn Leaves, and he closed his eyes briefly, absorbing it. He didn't need validation from anyone. He didn't need to defend himself. His life spoke louder than anything he could say. Back in the service area, Chloe was growing restless. "He hasn't even looked annoyed," she whispered to Jason. "Like he owns the place." Jason gave her a look. "Maybe you should just give him good service. You know, like everyone else." But Chloe wasn't ready to let go. "I bet he'll bail before the check arrives," she muttered. "People like that usually do." What Chloe didn't realize was that people like that didn't exist. Not in the neat little box she had constructed in her mind. And tonight, that box was already starting to crack. Jamal looked around once more, catching the eye of the Whitakers. Mr. Whitaker raised his glass subtly. Jamal nodded in return. He didn't know them, but he appreciated the silent acknowledgement. That's the thing about dignity, it's universal. And even in a room dressed in chandeliers and silk, it was the man in the hoodie sitting near the kitchen who held the most presence. And Chloe, with all her polished professionalism, was the only one who couldn't see it. The moment Chloe walked away from Jamal's table, a smug sense of satisfaction settled across her features. She convinced herself she had neutralized a problem before it could taint the restaurant's polished image. Yet, even as she wove between the more appropriate patrons of Verrell, an unsettling energy began to stir, not loud or chaotic, but a quiet murmur building in the spaces between clinking glassware and whispered gossip. Jamal, seated alone near the kitchen's swinging doors, didn't react. His posture remained relaxed, one hand gently tapping the linen-covered table to the slow rhythm of the cello playing in the corner. While Chloe strutted past with her chin raised, convinced she had put him in his place, Jamal's calm presence was beginning to attract the kind of attention she never anticipated. Minutes passed. Chloe purposely skipped his table as she made a theatrical show of attending to others, greeting a couple in a 3-piece suit and cocktail gown with exaggerated charm, bending to refill wine glasses, laughing a bit too loudly at a guest's lukewarm joke. But the more she performed, the more her act rang hollow. Olivia Torres, seated with a friend just 2 tables over, noticed the strange gap in service. A sharp-eyed 30-year-old Latina attorney from Brooklyn, Olivia had seen this dance before, in boardrooms, courtrooms, and, now, restaurants. She leaned closer to her dinner companion and whispered, "You seeing what I'm seeing?" Her friend glanced toward the back. "The man alone?" Olivia nodded. She seated him by the kitchen, hasn't returned since. Bet she offered to explain the menu, too. Her friend raised an eyebrow. And he's just sitting there, like he doesn't even care. Olivia took a sip of her wine. That's not someone who doesn't care. That's someone who knows exactly who he is. At the other end of the dining room, Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker, a couple in their early 70s who had dined at Verrell every Saturday since 2014, exchanged their own quiet observations. Mr. Whitaker, a retired philosophy professor with an ear for subtle power dynamics, had noticed the moment Chloe veered Jamal toward the least desirable seat in the house. "Did you see how she bypassed the main floor?" he murmured. His wife, elegant in pearls and silk, replied without looking up, "Saw it. Felt it. It's shameful." Their eyes shifted toward Jamal, who now smiled slightly as the cellist transitioned into a soft rendition of Summertime. He raised a hand and clapped gently when the song concluded, earning a grateful nod from the musician. That single moment, a man alone, applauding beauty in the midst of disregard, felt like a ripple in still water. Meanwhile, Chloe circled the dining floor again, still refusing to return to Jamal's table. Each time she passed, she pretended not to notice him, balancing a tray in one hand and her ego in the other. But her silence was becoming deafening. Jamal remained composed. He took in the scene slowly, not with defiance, but with quiet clarity. He observed the whispered glances, the tilt of heads, the shift in body language among nearby diners. He wasn't just being watched, he was being studied. Yet still, he didn't budge. Chloe, watching from the side station near the bar, scoffed to her colleague Jason. "Still sitting there like he owns the place," she muttered, biting the edge of her lip with annoyance. Jason looked over toward Jamal, then back at Chloe. "Maybe he does. Or maybe he's just enjoying his meal like everyone else." Chloe rolled her eyes. "People like him? They fake it. They order the most expensive thing and hope no one asks questions." Jason didn't reply. He simply returned to polishing silverware, the clatter of flatware offering a more honest answer than any words could. Back at the table, Jamal opened the wine list and casually flipped through the pages. He wasn't in a rush. His hands moved slowly, his expression serene. When a busboy passed by and nervously offered water, Jamal thanked him with a smile so genuine, it visibly startled the young man. "Thank you, son," Jamal said warmly. "I appreciate that." The busboy nodded, uncertain, and scurried away, but not before casting one more look over his shoulder at the man who seemed more gracious than anyone else in the room. The moments stretched. Still no food. Still no service. And yet Jamal's quiet presence had begun to shift the atmosphere inside Verrell like a subtle change in air pressure before a storm. Diners who had once ignored the man in the hoodie now found themselves drawn to his table, not with condescension but with curiosity. Olivia and her friend whispered again, this time their tone different, more respectful, more thoughtful. "Who do you think he is?" her friend asked. "I don't know," Olivia said. "But I'm pretty sure we're all about to find out." Chloe, unaware of how much she had misjudged the situation, decided to escalate her game. She sauntered toward Jamal's table with the kind of exaggerated grace reserved for Broadway stages. In her hand was a menu, though he already had one, and her voice was coated with saccharine superiority. "I just wanted to make sure you understood the pricing," she said, placing the second menu down with unnecessary force. "The Wagyu is our most luxurious dish, at $390. We don't get many first-timers ordering that one." Jamal looked up from the wine list, his eyes twinkling slightly with amusement. "And yet here I am," he replied. Chloe forced a smile. "Well, some guests don't realize the tax and gratuity add up quickly." Jamal nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch. "Is that something you explain to every guest, or just the ones wearing hoodies?" Chloe blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" "I said," Jamal repeated, his tone still calm but unmistakably firm, "do you make it a habit to explain prices to everyone, or just the ones who don't fit your image of wealth?" Chloe opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. She stood there, flustered, staring at a man who hadn't raised his voice or posture, but had managed to dismantle her entire position with one sentence. She spun around and walked briskly back to the kitchen, her face flushed. At the bar, Jason looked up. "That didn't go the way you thought, huh?" Chloe didn't answer. Her eyes darted to the back, to the table she had tried so hard to dismiss, and now couldn't stop watching. Back in the dining room, Olivia put her fork down. That man just held more power with one sentence than most people do yelling. Mr. Whitaker nodded. "That's what real presence looks like." And so, the restaurant fell into a new kind of silence, not the polished, expensive hush of Varel's usual evenings, but a quiet charged with tension, curiosity, and slow-burning shame. Jamal, the man near the kitchen, had become the true center of attention, not for his attire, not for his order, but for the way he carried himself. As guests shifted uneasily, and Chloe tried to reclaim control, the stage was quietly being set for something none of them could predict. And Jamal Preston hadn't even touched his food yet. The tension inside Varel had reached a stillness so complete it felt like the calm before an unseen storm. Jamal Preston, seated alone in the dim back corner of the restaurant, remained unbothered, though everyone else couldn't seem to stop watching him. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't demanded anything, and yet with nothing more than silence and a few carefully chosen words, he had exposed a truth the staff, and especially Chloe, weren't prepared to confront. Chloe Harrington stood near the bar, her arms folded tightly across her chest, eyes flickering back toward Jamal's table with a mix of defiance and something new, doubt. Her performance was unraveling, and for the first time that evening, she wasn't sure if she had the upper hand. She had expected him to storm out or maybe snap back, confirming all her assumptions. But instead, he just sat there, dignified and calm, letting her own behavior unravel her credibility. The murmurs around the dining room grew louder, more pointed. Olivia Torres was now fully turned toward Jamal's table, her friend recording discreetly under the tablecloth. Mr. Whitaker leaned toward his wife. "She doesn't even know the lesson she's walking into," he said softly. Mrs. Whitaker nodded. "But she's about to." And then it happened. The glass doors near the front of the restaurant swung open with a quiet whoosh, and through them stepped a sharply dressed man with a purposeful stride. Mid-40s, salt and pepper hair, eyes scanning the room with immediate precision. He wasn't a server. He wasn't a guest. He was Mr. Bennett, the restaurant director, and the sudden shift in staff posture confirmed his presence carried weight. Chloe spotted him instantly and straightened, relief momentarily flickering in her eyes. She rushed toward him. "Mr. Bennett, so glad you're here," she began, lowering her voice. "We've had a bit of a situation in the back." But Bennett barely registered her words. His gaze locked on Jamal's table, and something in his expression changed. He brushed past her without a word, walking briskly through the restaurant, his footsteps like a drumbeat echoing beneath the hush. Diners turned to follow his movement. Jamal, watching with mild interest, placed his linen napkin neatly beside his untouched plate. Mr. Bennett stopped in front of him, eyes wide with recognition. Then, he bowed. "Mr. Preston," he said, his voice a mix of respect and disbelief. "Sir, we had no idea you were visiting us tonight. Please accept my sincerest apologies for the delay and any inconvenience." The room gasped. Someone dropped a fork. Across the restaurant, Olivia sat back slowly, eyebrows rising. "Mr. Preston," she whispered. Chloe's face drained of color. She stood frozen by the side station, unable to move, unable to blink. The words crashed over her like a wave she couldn't escape. Jamal Preston. The name echoed around the room like a bell finally struck. Diners whispered furiously now, some tapping on their phones, pulling up Google as Mr. Bennett continued speaking, his voice now firm and clear. "You are always welcome here, Mr. Preston. I apologize on behalf of my entire staff. This is not how we treat guests, especially not someone of your stature." Jamal gave him a small, gracious smile. "No worries," he said calmly. "I wasn't looking for special treatment. I just wanted a quiet dinner." Mr. Bennett turned toward Chloe then, his expression no longer polite. "Chloe," he said, his voice tight, a word. She stepped forward slowly, like a child caught doing something unspeakable. I didn't know who he was," she stammered. "I was just trying to follow procedure. It's not about who he is," Mr. Bennett cut in sharply. "It's about who you assumed he wasn't." Chloe's mouth opened, then closed. No words came. Her carefully crafted mask of superiority was gone, crumbled beneath the weight of her own bias. Mr. Bennett turned back to Jamal. "Please, allow us to move you to the main suite. It's private, quiet, and much more appropriate." But Jamal shook his head gently. "I'm fine here. Really. The view's not bad. The music's good." His smile was light, but his eyes held a depth that said volumes. "And I think this seat served a purpose tonight." Across the room, heads lowered. Diners who had once looked on silently now wore expressions of discomfort, guilt, and reflection. Olivia stood up and gave a quiet nod toward Jamal, a simple gesture of respect. Even Mr. Whitaker set down his wine glass and gave a slow, deliberate clap. It only lasted 2 seconds, but it was joined by 2 more. Then 5. Then 10. Until a subtle wave of applause rippled through the restaurant, not thunderous, not celebratory, but respectful. Chloe blinked, tears threatening to break through the corners of her eyes. She stepped forward, now face to face with Jamal, voice trembling. "Mr. Preston. I'm sorry. Truly. I was wrong. I didn't see you for who you are." Jamal's smile didn't fade. "You don't need to see me for who I am," he said gently. "Just see me. That's enough." Chloe nodded, overwhelmed, and stepped back, eyes cast down. Mr. Bennett excused himself to address the staff in the back, while Chloe retreated to the server station in silence. Jamal turned his attention back to the now cooling steak, picked up his knife, and resumed his meal. And still, all eyes remained on him. Because in that quiet corner, the man in the hoodie had changed the entire mood of the room, not with a raised voice or power play, but with dignity, restraint, and presence. When the final notes of the cello faded and the checks were presented, Jamal rose from his table, left a generous tip, and thanked the staff without a trace of bitterness. As he walked toward the exit, Mr. Bennett rushed ahead to hold the door open, his voice low and respectful. "Thank you again, Mr. Preston. Please return any time." Jamal nodded. "I might. It's a nice place, could just use a little more grace in the service." Then he stepped outside, the city lights brushing gold across his shoulders as he walked into the Manhattan night. Inside, Verrill remained quiet for a long moment, the sound of diners slowly returning to their meals overshadowed by the lesson they'd just witnessed. And Chloe, back at her station, wiped away a tear, not because of the reprimand, but because, for the first time in a long time, she saw herself clearly. Some lessons come loud, others whispered. But the ones that linger, the ones that change us, are delivered just like Jamal Preston, in stillness, with humility, and the power of grace. In a world so often driven by appearances, prestige, and snap judgments, we sometimes forget that the truest form of power doesn't need to shout, it speaks quietly through presence, patience, and integrity. Jamal Preston's story is not just about a man who was misjudged because of the clothes he wore or the table he was assigned. It's about the strength of knowing your worth, even when the world around you tries to diminish it. What made Jamal's presence so impactful wasn't his financial success or public reputation, it was the way he handled disrespect without returning it, how he met ignorance with grace, and how he chose dignity over confrontation. In today's culture, we are often told to clap back, to retaliate, to expose people loudly. But sometimes, the most powerful response is calm. Sometimes, simply standing in your truth, without flinching or lowering yourself to the standards of others, teaches a deeper lesson than words ever could. Chloe's behavior reflected something many of us have either witnessed or, if we're honest, may have been guilty of ourselves, assuming someone's worth based on surface details. Her transformation, while painful, was necessary. Because growth doesn't begin with knowing who someone is, it begins with recognizing our own blind spots and being willing to change. Let this story be a reminder that everyone deserves to be treated with basic human respect, regardless of what they wear, where they sit, or how they appear. The polished suit at the center of the room does not hold more value than the quiet soul in the back corner. True elegance, after all, isn't defined by luxury. It's defined by how we treat others when no one is watching, or when everyone is. So the next time you catch yourself making assumptions, pause. Ask yourself, am I seeing the person, or just the packaging? Because behind every face, every hoodie, every accent, every table in the back corner, there's a story. And sometimes, that story holds a lesson we all need to learn. On behalf of U.S. Daily Story, thank you for listening and spending this time with us. If this message resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need a reminder of the quiet strength that lives in grace. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story that challenges assumptions and inspires change. Until next time, remember, you don't have to be loud to be powerful. And sometimes, the most unforgettable impact comes from those who never raise their voice.